here to this really first time event on our part, this JMS Idea Development Workshop. I want to thank very much Gideon, Markman, and Riikka Sarala for organizing this session. I'm not sure if some of you would be aware, but we had overwhelming demand. Something like 250 people expressed interest in this opportunity. So you are some of the select few. Also, thanks to Joanne Cheseldine, who really helped organize and structure and take care of all the logistical and operational aspects of this initiative. Perhaps I could just say a couple things about JMS for those of you who may not be as familiar with it or may not have been tracking what we've been up to lately. Journal of Management Studies has a long and illustrious history. We've been publishing for many decades. And I think it's safe to say that some of the most influential management scholarship has come out of the journal historically. So we're very proud of our legacy and proud of our history. We're a broad-based management journal, and Riikka's going to talk to you in a moment about how broad that is. But perhaps I could just bring you up to date on a couple recent initiatives that we've been pursuing that may be of interest to you. First of all, we have officially moved to the Scholar One manuscript central system. So you will find that if you were to submit to the journal now, we are on that system, which probably many of you are familiar with other journals. Secondly, we have really ramped up our social media initiatives, and we have a number of platforms and places where you will see us more visible on social media. In the normal social media channels, like LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, but also we now have our own YouTube channel where we're publishing videos. Take a look there when you have a chance. I will say that Gideon Markman still has the award for the most impactful and professional video posted there. And we have a blog now as well. So we're really trying to get the word out in all the different ways that we possibly can. In addition to the different types of paper submissions, which Riikka is going to describe to you in a couple moments, we've also had a pretty ambitious initiative around COVID. We invited a number of senior scholarships to contribute short commentaries on how COVID might affect different aspects of management studies going forward. We've now published about 35 of those commentaries. We have another 10 to be published in the coming months. And I think they're really having an influence in getting people to think a little bit about how the pandemic has changed some of the assumptions and theories and frameworks and perspectives we have about management. So once again, welcome from the general editors and the entire editorial leadership of the journal. We're really excited to have you with us for what I know is going to be a dynamic afternoon. And let me now turn things over to Riikka Sarala.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. We're so delighted to have you all here. Here you can see the workshop schedule, and this is also what Joe has shared with all of you. The first part of the workshop is a plenary session, which all of you are very welcome to attend, and we're so glad that you're all here. And then the second part is for those participants who received an invitation for the breakout room session. I would like to kindly remind you that this plenary session of the workshop is being recorded. So by your continuing to attend this meeting, you agree with your image or voice being potentially recorded and published. And also, I would kindly ask you to save any question that you have to the end of my part of the introduction and then to the end of Gideon's section. So this way we can keep the session flowing nicely. So I would like to start by giving you an introduction to JMS and talk just a little bit about what we typically look for in research papers that we publish. And then Gideon will talk more about theory and contribution and how to build those elements in your research papers. So JMS is a general management journal, so we publish both empirical and conceptual articles. We typically cover a broad range of research fields within management studies, ranging from organizational behavior to strategy and all the way to critical management studies. We do not, however, typically publish research that is purely in the area of finance or marketing and that does not fall into the area of general management studies. Here you can see our current editorial team. We have a very diverse editorial team, so we have expertise across various theories, methods, and geographic areas, so we can accommodate very different kinds of papers, both in terms of theory and method. JMS performs well in the international rankings. Most notably, JMS is on the Financial Times list since 2010. In the UK, JMS is ranked in the category 4 in the ABS rankings, and the impact factor for 2019 was 4.9. Regarding the types of articles that JMS publishes, the majority of the content is regular research articles that you submit to the journal anytime. And as Jonathan mentioned, in the beginning of this year, we transitioned to the electronic submission through the Manuscript Central, which now makes the submission process really easy and also allows you to follow the progression of your manuscript through the process. So I hope you will like the new system, at least from the editorial perspective. The transition has been very smooth thanks to our wonderful editorial office. You can also submit a proposal of a short essay for consideration in the JMSS section. And in addition, we have point-counterpoint articles that provide different views on a topic that is central to management studies. And often those views are somewhat controversial or contradictory, so these point counterpoints make really interesting reading. And these points counterpoints are based on submitting a proposal. And we also publish high quality review articles, and we encourage you to submit your best reviews to us. So let me move on to talk a little bit about what makes a paper appealing to JMS. And these are also guidelines that apply to any good research papers. So they are not specifically only valuable from the perspective of JMS. My discussion is based on a paper by a former JMS editor, Gerardo Patriota, who just stepped down from being the general editor. Regarding the motivation, it's important to provide a very clear motivation for your paper. So you want to explain why your research area is interesting and novel. I know that for us as scholars, every idea is interesting and novel, but you also have to convince your colleagues and the reviewers and the editors that you have something really interesting and novel to say. It's good to offer a clear and explicit research question or research aim so that the reader knows what your objective is in the study. You also want to be very clear in explaining your contribution. How do you contribute to the literature and to what body of literature? And you want to make sure that you have one core message that you carry through the paper and that the message stays consistent throughout the paper. Another important aspect is conceptual clarity, which really is key to any good research paper. So you want to define each concept, and you want to try and not include too many concepts. And at the same time, you want to make sure that each concept aligns with the underlying theory or theories that you're using as your theoretical grounding. So you have this alignment between all the concepts that you use and the theory that you're using in the paper. Regarding the methods, you want to justify your specific method, and you want to be very transparent about how you collected your data, which analysis you used, and also remember to justify any choice that you made. Again, those choices you as a researcher might seem obvious, but for someone else coming from a different research stream, research perspective, those choices may not be as obvious. So you want to make sure that you're really clear in explaining what you did and why. When presenting your finding, Gerardo uses the term show and tell method, and I like that because that's what my kids do at school, and we're applying this method at a higher intellectual level, but it's the same method. So you want to show what your data tells you, and then you want to explain to the reader what it means. And while doing this, you also want to be careful of not reaching beyond what your data says, while at the same time explaining what your findings mean. So it's about finding balance about what you can say about the data without reaching out and saying what the data can really tell you. And finally, in the discussion section, you want to make sure that you answer your research question or your research aim. So you go back to the beginning and go back to answering your research aim or research question that you stated in the introduction. And you also explain to the reader how the findings extend prior research and the extent to which they can be generalized to different contexts. And it's also important to offer reflections on the managerial implications and to explain what practitioners can learn from the study. And also more and more is becoming important to also state the societal or policy implications as well. So those are important to reflect when you discuss your study in the discussion section more broadly. So this concludes my part. I think this would be a good point to take any questions that you have about the journal before moving on to Gideon's part.
Hello, could I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
I just saw the chat there that it says, do we put it on the chat or not? But I'll just, seeing as I've unlocked my microphone, I'll just ask you anyway. Yeah, my name's Tom Rollins. Hello, thanks for the invite here. The quick question, you talked about what makes a paper good or interesting for your journal. But I noticed the interesting part about these engaging essays that also can be offered ad hoc. What makes an essay interesting for your journal? That's my question.
I'll maybe make a quick comment there. Tom, welcome. Nice to see you. So the essays are quite diverse, to be honest with you. They take a lot of different forms. If you were to look at the journal, I think the best way to get to know what we might be looking for is to actually look at what we publish. A number of the essays are more personal reflections on the part of scholars regarding challenges or changes in the context in which they're working and how that may have affected their scholarship. So the essays tend to be a little bit more individual and personal reflections by scholars about the scholarly enterprise. And without starting to name them, I don't want to get more specific than that, but take a look and see the kinds of things that we published. And I think that'll maybe give you some sense of what we might therefore be looking for.
That's great, thank you.
Hi there. Hopefully I can ask a question. This is Frances from cold Canada, although we've had a very warm winter as well, so it's been very odd. Anyway, my question has to do with the method section of the papers and what's the preference in JMS. The paper I'm going to be discussing with the group and looking forward to your feedback has cluster analysis done by a very talented statistician, and the write-up, I don't get it. So I'm wondering if, and I apologize for not having read extensive articles in JMS, I could have figured this out by myself, but a little busy. What's your preference? Is it switching like the legal environment where, you know, we're kind of going a bit more towards layman's language, or you're looking for the super precise research methods write-up?
Riikka, do you want to take that one?
Yes, well, I can say that you want to make your research method understandable, also for someone who comes from a slightly different empirical or theoretical perspective. Because we are a general management journal, we cover a very broad range of methods. So I think it's to your benefit and also to the reader's benefit that you explain the method in a way that also someone who's not using that method can understand it. And then of course during the process there are different ways that a lot of times there are discussions with the editor and reviewer about aspects that at the end do not end up going into the paper. So a lot of times, we say, okay, this is enough, but we're now convinced that it's valid, it's well done, but maybe all of these appendices don't have to go into the actual final version.
Okay, no, that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Let me answer a question that came through the chat having to do with whether we do developmental reviews for younger scholars. And the short answer is no, not really. And it's simply a matter of time and resources. We received over 1,200 manuscript submissions in 2020. And we're, like all editors, just stretched really thin, as are our reviewers. What we do is workshops like this. So this is really our contribution to the development of younger or the entire scholarly community. And we will continue to do additional virtual sessions. And then when we're able to meet face to face, we'll continue with live workshops as well. Maybe one or two more questions before we move on to Gideon's presentation.
Hi, I have a question. So my name is Harsh, and I have since Journal of Management Studies being a management journal, is there a preference given to interdisciplinary research, or do you expect us to be, like in the discussion section, be more broader than going into a specific field?
Gideon, would you want to take a crack at that? That might be something that you're going to touch on in kind of indirectly in your presentation as well.
Yeah, sounds good. You need to you start with what you have to offer. You start with your study. Don't worry about trying to appeal to. Yeah, it is a general journal, but your contribution needs to be very specific and very tractable. So that would be my starting point, and try to make a contribution that it would that is really building on what you did and can carry the conversation forward. That would be my advice.
Thank you so much.
More questions?
There is a question in the chat that says, do we limit the length of a research paper? If one of the editors wants to take that one.
Yeah, I was going to answer that in the chat, and we don't have a hard limit, but we do provide guidelines, and so most of our papers are between 9,000 and 12,000 words. Occasionally, we get something a little bit longer than that, which we'll still look at. But I'm going to post the manuscript guidelines in the chat, and you can all have a quick look at them.
All right. Maybe I will, first of all, share the slides, but if there are other questions in the meantime, please bring them on. All right, so how about we jump into this section? First of all, I want to thank Riikka, very nice explanation. And of course, Joe, we could not have done it without you. Hello, everybody again, and I hope you are doing very well. If you like some of what was said and explained, don't hesitate to send some emojis to Riikka. I think she would love to get those. So I'm going to break my segment into two parts. First, I will kind of try to explain some differences and synergies between hypothesis theories and physical laws. And then the next part will be I will try to answer the question, is my paper really making an impact? Now, I know this is a Zoom and it's not as interactive as we would like it to be, but Jonathan and Riikka, and I know John Prescott is also online. So if you have questions all throughout, just shoot them on the discussion on the chat, and you will be able to. But the good news is that I only have about 10 slides. So I'm going to try to do it as quickly as I can so we can have more discussion after that. So true or false? A supported hypothesis will be eventually elevated into a theory, and a theory, once supported, maybe it will become a physical law. And of course, this is not really the case. It doesn't matter how hard we work on our hypothesis, theories, and laws, they will never become one another. So hypothesis, just for completeness, hypothesis is a limited prediction of a phenomenon. A theory is an in-depth causal predictive explanation of an event. And I underline the word causal because the truth of the matter is that, only experimental designs will be able to illustrate causality, but it doesn't matter because the theory is still expecting you to have a causal explanation. A theory is really a causal statement about what, how, when. So Einstein's theory of relativity explained what gravity is and how it works. I know many of us are probably in love with the theory of evolution. At the end, it is still a theory. It is not a physical law. A law is a descriptive statement, usually in mathematical equation, that describes the phenomenon. So Newton's law of gravity and Mendel's law of independent assortment are examples of physical laws. So the nuance here is that laws describe an observation. They do not provide the how or why gravity works. Okay? Astrophysicists use Newton's law of gravity to land robots on Mars, not to explain how gravity works or what it is. For that, we have Einstein's theory of relativity. Biologists use Mendel's law of independent assortment to predict which traits will pass from parents to kids, but not to explain how this transmission is actually happening. It was only after we discovered DNA and chromosomes that Morgan was able to develop the theory of chromosomal inheritance. So I know we all have PhDs. Why should we talk all of a sudden about the differences between hypotheses, theories, and laws? There are a couple of good reasons. First of all, I want you to appreciate the distinct nature and their synergy, how they are complementing each other. And maybe more importantly, I would like you to look at them and say, wow, actually hypotheses, theories, and laws, they're flexible. They're asking us to be more humble and more tolerant. And in fact, I would go as far as say, they're the best medicine against being dogmatic. Now, why and how? And here, if you don't mind, I'm going to quote from Karl Popper, the Austrian British philosopher, who said, "Science is not a system of certain or well-established statements, nor is it a statement which steadily advances toward a state of finality. Our science is not knowledge episteme, in parentheses. It can never be claimed to have attained a truth. And I continue the quote, the old scientific ideal of episteme, of absolute certainty, demonstrable knowledge, has proved itself to be an idol. The demand for scientific objectivity makes it inevitable that every scientific statement must remain tentative. Tentative. The bottom line here is that let's follow Karl Popper and understand that scientific discovery means that every scientific statement must remain tentative. So the reason that I overemphasize hypotheses, theories, and laws is that together they acknowledge that science is not a destination. It really is all about this movement, constant movement. Almost every truth is actually temporary truth. Imagine that. Okay? So to recap, theories and even scientific law, physical laws are quite flexible. They have exceptions that we have to discover. That's our job. In fact, and this is the most difficult question for many scholars to ask is, how can I prove myself wrong? Under what conditions will the theory be not right, will not work? Ongoing testing and observations tweak the law of gravity and even the law of independent assortment. Newton's law of gravity, think about it, it's a law. If you're like me, I thought laws never change, but that law itself breaks down when looking at the quantum level. If you look at Mendel's law of independent assortment, that too, it breaks down when traits are linked on the same chromosome. Okay? So now that we understand the difference and the commonality and the synergy between hypothesis, theories, and laws. Now that we understand that as scientists, we have to be humble and allow science to move forward and change. Maybe now we can move to my next part, which is, am I making an impact? Is my research really moving the needle in some way? And, you know, it's, I'm sure you notice that every time we ask a question, things open up. If we make statements, things close up. So when we have a question, this is a big question. Am I making an impact? So my approach, I try to break it down into smaller questions. So I would say, do we have a compelling, big question? Are we addressing a meaningful, important gap? And when I say gap, it could be a gap between theory and practice or reality. What are the conditions under which the theory will not work? Is it a gap between theory and theory? Two theories make very different explanations and predictions about the same phenomenon. Maybe it's a gap between data or information and theory. Is our topic, is our research question important? What will happen if we didn't address it, right? And this really leads me to timeless truths and temporary truths. And one way to look at this, so I'm kind of segueing a little bit, is to think about, you know, before RBV, we just looked at resources and we said resources. Maybe we said natural resources and human resources. And then RBV came and we said, no. There are 4 resource attributes that are critical for competitive advantage. They are valuable, rare, costly to imitate, costly to substitute. So you look at resources and you segment them. And that's what I'm doing with truth. I'm taking truth and I'm bringing it to timeless and temporary, right? And when you think about timeless truth, for thousands of years, we learned that we could not fly. There was empirical evidence. What is the nature of this empirical evidence? We strapped those wings, we climbed the mountains, and we jumped and we flopped and it didn't matter. As much as we tried for hundreds or maybe thousands of years, we proved, and it was timeless truth, we could not fly. Okay? But then on December 17, 1903, at 10:35 a.m., Wilbur made the first flight. Actually, on that day, most people don't know that they made 4 different flights on the same day. Now, how far did they fly? How long did it take? What if I tell you the first flight was actually, in today's consider, we would call it a jump. It carried them only 120 feet. That's like 40 meters. The fourth one, they were able to cross 852 feet. That's 280 some meters. You know how long it took that last one to fly? Less than 1 minute, 59 seconds. That was the switch that a timeless truth became temporary. And guess what? This is our job. Our job is to find timeless truths. You say, whoa, wait a minute. What are the conditions? Under what conditions will this truth become temporary? There is a new truth, okay? So, will your study change the truth? Will it change how we theorize, how we conduct research? Will your study ask more expansive questions? Will it open a new domain that we did not even consider? Or maybe it will finally close this chronic debate that we've been dealing for many, many years. Will it bring awareness to a wider, more consequential issue? And here, when we think about making an impact, I want to redirect your attention to 2 JMS studies. Really, the first one shows how scholars can make a difference and broaden the impact of their research. This article is really examining 5 forms of impact: scholarly, practical, societal, policy, and educational. And then the second article, and I think we might have gotten a question about that, is about how to make a review article, impactful review articles. So I hope you will take the time to look through those articles, which provide really insightful information on that front. But there is another thing that I want to share with you, is that often when we review articles, we ask, what dogma is being challenged? You know, consistent with which new truths will I learn today? So I don't want to be too theoretical or academic about it. So I prepared a few examples, actually 6 examples. I'm going to go run through them really quickly. Here's a dogma. For many, many years, we said that when social entrepreneurs and environmental entrepreneurs are being acquired, we said, they were selling out. When Coca-Cola acquired Honesty, we said Honesty was selling out. But Saracen and Dean said that's not really the case. In fact, there are conditions under which small companies can, think about COVID, they can infect the large corporations with sustainability values or environmental values or social responsibility values. Although the small companies will disappear, the values will propagate and will continue. Here's another dogma. For many years, we said that only big government can tackle big market failures, and that private individuals cannot. And Saraswati and Ramesh said, no. There are conditions under which even private individuals can engage in collective action and actually tackle formidable problems that we did not even consider possible. Here's another one. A dogma that wealth creation is really only about making money. And then Lumpkin and back came and said, actually, wealth creation can include health, joy, well-being, independence, and so on. And of course, there is the dogma that entrepreneurship is only about job creation or economic growth, and that Jonathan and his colleagues said, no, actually, there are conditions under which entrepreneurs can do remarkable things through cross-sector partnership and deal with fundamental problems that others could not solve on their own. And of course, I took this opportunity to self-promote myself a little bit with 2 studies. The first dogma is that companies only compete with themselves. They don't compete with non-companies. Well, it turns out that there are conditions under which companies are competing with activists, environmentalists, social. This is not a competition over market share, but it is really rivalry over world views. So this is a more philosophical fight. And of course, there is the dogma that every market entry is adversarial. That's the creative destruction hypothesis or theory. And we said, no, actually, there are many conditions under which startups will see even the large corporations will put the red carpet for them and say, come on in, as long as you expand my market reach, or maybe you can help me with segments I cannot get to and I cannot reach. So maybe to wrap it up, I would say that we at JMS often reject papers that remain at the data and information, but we love studies that carry us into wisdom. So if you ask yourself, if you want to answer the question, am I making an impact? Maybe you want to ask yourself, what wisdom am I going to teach? What wisdom will I bring to the field with my study? So I hope this clarifies those two areas: theories, hypothesis, physical laws, and the flexibility of science. The fact that we need to be humble as scholars. And on the other hand, the story about timeless truth versus temporary truth and making an impact. So how about we open it up to questions? I'm going to close this and please bring them on.
Could I ask a question? I noticed in the in what you're interested in. So you're not interested in finance and marketing side, but I also didn't see in your list of interests for the journal ethics and moral philosophy. How interested are you in moral philosophy in the Journal of Management Studies?
We are very interested in these topics, and how about I invite Jonathan to add on that, Weber? Bring
Sure.
them on.
Yeah, in fact, I think JMS has really carved out some pretty serious space in that realm of ethics, moral philosophy, corporate responsibility, critical management studies. So I think if we broaden the domain just a little bit, you will see that JMS has really, I think, made a mark in those areas. I will say that most of our readers and reviewers are trained in social science traditions. And so if by moral philosophy, you mean more of a kind of a philosophical reflection, the way that a humanities scholar might, that could be a little bit tougher to share with our natural constituency. It could be a subject for a JMS Says essay, though. So the JMS Says might be a place where something that's a little bit more broadly philosophical and reflective can belong. But in terms of topical area, that's definitely an area of interest of us.
Great, thank you.
So there's a question in the chat about whether we're interested in new conceptual theories on socioeconomic impacts. Hard to answer that question in theory, but I would say that we are open-minded about different theoretical traditions, including those that have maybe been advanced in allied fields. when I hear new theory, I get a little nervous because I think sometimes new theories may not be as new as they are presented. And one of the things that I would say to you about JMS generally and sort of reasons for rejection, it's often when authors overstate or overpromise on their contribution, especially their theoretical contribution. But in general, JMS is a very pluralistic journal. In fact, among the major general management journals, I would argue JMS is the most pluralistic of the bunch. Riikka, do you want to take this next one about practical implications?
Sure. That JMS is not a practice-oriented journal, as you know. We are more theoretically oriented, but I think that being said, it's also important to show the implications. And I think the practical implications also relates to the relevance of your study. So you want to show that your findings matter and that they matter to practitioners or practicing managers or whoever you're researching. So you want to make that link, and I think it's helpful to make that link that sometimes we get papers and you're thinking this is interesting, but who is this helping? What is the relevance of this? So if you go into it, I think it can be helpful for the editor and the reviewers and also the reader to see the importance and implications of your research.
And in the editorial that a couple of us wrote that Gideon referred to earlier, in which we discuss these 5 different ways that scholars can make impact, we also urge scholars and provide specific examples of papers that we believe have made impact across several of those areas. So that have made a scholarly impact and a practical impact, or a scholarly impact and a policy impact. So I would encourage you to take a look at the editorial, and especially some of the examples and illustrations that we use to demonstrate how scholars have made multiple impacts across those domains.
I was wondering if I could ask a question.
Yeah, please.
So thank you so much for this session and also for the editorial you sent. One of the things, as I was looking at the checklist that you have, I wanted to get your thoughts on what is kind of the number one reason why you desk reject. I noticed your rate was about 59%, and so wanted to get your thoughts on that. And then I really like your schematic about where you guys have gone from earlier on to now, this wisdom realm. And what does that wisdom look like in terms of joining the conversation of your subject area within the journal?
Maybe I could take the first part of the question, then I'd encourage Gideon and or Riikka to answer the second. So on the YouTube channel, one of the videos that I recorded, which we call JMS Reflections, is precisely about the reasons for desk reject. And I'll summarize that very short video in saying that the number one reason is fit. So we have submissions, notwithstanding the fact that we, I think, have a very clear definition of aims and scope that just don't belong in the journal. So they're finance or they're marketing or they're information technology or computer science or something. So that's easy. For papers that do belong within the realm of JMS, the number one reason is inability to demonstrate a substantial contribution or potential to make a substantial contribution. Now that sounds very vague, but I think what Gideon shared with you are some of the things that you should shoot for so that you don't find yourself subject to that threshold of not signaling or demonstrating the ability to make a substantial contribution to the management literature. Gideon, you want to take the second part of that question?
Yeah, I think you covered it, but I'd say when I get a paper and maybe it's just a hodgepodge of so many moving parts that the paper may be trying to do too much. Alternatively, the paper remain at such an abstract level, it's not tractable. Worse, we have papers that, for lack of a better word, just boring. Think, what's new? You're not teaching me anything. So remember when we were very young and we learned to ride the bicycle, it's like, or drive the car, and it was like, wow. It is sense of, it's not only the sense of freedom, it's a sense that I learned something. Learning should be liberating. It shouldn't be agonized, it shouldn't be boring, it should be uplifting. So it's like Jonathan said, it's very, very difficult to say it, because we're talking about some energy. When a paper has nothing there, it just doesn't resonate with anything that is, there is no lift. So I know this is not very tractable, but I hope it gives you a sense, at least a little bit.
No, it does. Thank you so much.
And I'll just add quickly that a lot of times it might also be an issue, which really goes to what Jonathan was saying about fit and what Gideon was saying about big ideas, that sometimes the contribution of the paper is just very incremental or contextual. And a lot of times that's great for a specialty journal where you have scholars who will really value that little incremental contribution. But from our perspective as a general management journal, our audience is not specialized in that specific topic. So a lot of times from our perspective, we say, oh, this contribution is too incremental. And it doesn't really mean that the contribution is bad. It just means that that you need to target a more focused specialty outlet with that paper.
And in the video, I use the example of international business, which is one of my areas of coverage, as well as Riikka's. And it is not infrequent that we will receive a paper in the international management domain that would be suitably rerouted to an international business field journal that just doesn't have enough general application for a broad general management readership.
Thank you.
Gideon, there was a question in the chat having to do with different types of wisdom beyond counterintuitive or anti-dogma.
So yeah, that's a great question. I'd say that there are lots of opportunities to just move us forward. It's not counterintuitive, but it just takes us to the next level. I'm scratching my head to come up quickly with an example. This might be. See, look at what is happening now with the pandemic, and people are working from home, and company after company after company are saying people will not come back to work. I think it's the Outfitter in America, in North America, said no more. In fact, there are companies that don't even have an HR department. So this is, in the pandemic, is no longer counterintuitive, but it's a new level of HR. What are the implications for HR? Does that mean that everybody will become remote worker? How would that influence also the dynamics between those who actually work full time and are constantly there, and those who are just being inserted and as a temporary worker, and then they are being extracted? So there are lots of things that are not necessarily counterintuitive, and they're in fact quite tractable because they're happening in front of our eyes. How does that influence HR practices, management practices, and routines?
A question about review articles, Riikka, do you want to answer that one? It's asking how do we know if it's too narrow or too broad in a review article?
I think here what Gideon mentioned in the presentation about the article that several of our editors put together about reviews, that goes into different ways of making a theoretical contribution. And I think that will be really helpful taking a look at that to see that there are many different ways of making a contribution, and you can frame your review very narrowly or very broadly, and you can still be able to make a contribution but we sort of, in the article, we come up with different avenues of how you can make those contributions. For instance, looking at the underlying assumptions or looking for contradictions. So I think that will be a helpful starting point, and also to give you an idea that there is no standard format that you should follow, that we're open to different formats, but it should still, your literature review should advance knowledge. It shouldn't be just a summary of what has been done, but you can summarize, but then you need to take your synthesis to the next level, and that's really what we typically look for in the review articles. And I would say that's the reason why some of the review articles don't advance in the process, is because they are just summaries, and anyone who is familiar with the literature is not really learning anything new from reading that article.
Do you mind if I react really quickly for desk rejects? And I'm speaking only from my experience. I noticed that most of the desk rejects are not because the study was boring. I think, at least in my case, most of my desk reject, almost every paper has something. It's rare that there is a paper with nothing. The challenge is that we can have 5, 6, 7 revisions. So we're looking, given that we get over 1,200 papers a year, we really want papers to be well developed. I recommend, this is what I do to this day. Before I send a paper to a journal, not only that I go to conferences and I present, I try to defend my idea and use the feedback to improve it. I also send it to friendly reviewers. I strongly recommend sending your papers to, forget friendly, send them to hostile reviewers. See what you hear. These are the best reviewers, and they will tell you what it is. And again, we will use the humility that we learned that we need, science requires, and we will make it a better paper, and then we will send it in.
I'd like to answer another question about fashion, to put a weird term on it. How do you interpret, whether a journal has published a number of articles on something? Does that mean, yes, you should join that? Or does that mean, no, probably they've done enough, right? You've missed your window. So, because there is a couple of years from now, you probably won't be doing as many COVID papers. So how do you deal with that issue of, things coming in and out of fashion?
I personally think it's very hard to generalize. A number of the questions that have come through, I think it's very difficult to discuss sort of in the abstract. Yeah. I will say, though, that speaking to Gideon's presentation today, I will say that in my view, there are a number of areas that have kind of suitably run their course. They still tend to persist sometimes well beyond their, lifespan, their expected lifespan. But that's a very subjective assessment, I think. And so I personally find it very difficult to answer that question, and I'm not trying to evade it sort of in the abstract. So COVID, I don't think we're going to see, many journals have done special issues and essays, and we decided to do commentaries. So probably a year from now, you're not going to see that, but that doesn't mean you might have some retrospective pieces or more robust empirical analyses to see if some of the things that we're predicting now actually came to pass, as Gideon was saying about the workplace, for example. There's a lot of speculation about what the workplace is or is not going to look like a year or two. We don't know. We're kind of predicting or looking forward. Well, in a couple of years, we'll have some data. And I think that's still a very suitable topic to look at retrospectively. Did what was predicted actually come to pass? And more interestingly, if not, why? Why not?
Right. So again, it's the big question and the big contribution. Okay, thank you. Very helpful.
Yeah, I would add to that. Don't worry about what was done before and what your paper needs to stand on its own, regardless. If it complements or contradicts something that was before, that might be an extra bonus, but it needs to stand on its own.
I was going to respond to the next question about a conceptual foundation for a theoretical article. Again, I think it's just very, very difficult to speak about those things in the abstract. Putting it differently, there are no sort of templates to follow here. And I think sometimes we all fall into the temptation of wanting to, kind of have a script. And the beauty and maybe the challenge of research in this area is we don't have such a script. So it really is one of these situations where we need to kind of see it and experience it to really understand. So as Riikka mentioned, we do publish conceptual or theoretical papers, depending on your terminology. I would say they're not as frequent as theory testing or qualitative papers. I think they're more challenging to demonstrate a really solid contribution that is also tethered sort of in the real world. But we do publish them, and they tend to be relatively highly cited too when we do.
I see that Dawn is here. You have plenty of experience with that. Maybe you want to chime in on that.
On what?
The question was about theoretical papers, Don. Do we look for a conceptual model in theoretical papers? Would you prefer parsimony to comprehensiveness? That was the question.
Yeah, I think parsimony is better for conceptual papers. And we don't publish very many. I can't think of too many that we have published.
Yeah, we don't
Which is a
want,
shame, because AMR, there aren't too many outlets for conceptual papers.
it's true, but moreover, I mean, sometimes you get such a conceptual paper that is so complicated. You need 2 or 3 theories just to understand the theory that is presented. That's a problem. It is helpful to me personally. This does not reflect the journal philosophy on that. But yeah, if there is a conceptual model, a picture is worth 1,000 words, hopefully. So, but if I look at remember when we used to buy electronics many years back, and we couldn't use them unless we opened the manual. Today, you get your iPhone, you don't need to open any manual. Boom, you get to use it. Conceptual models should be like the latter. You look at them and you get immediately the idea. If you look at conceptual models and I think, oh my goodness, I need a manual, that's a problem. Because the conceptual model is the manual. I hope that helps.
Well, I'd rather see more inductive work that's theory building. I don't think there's enough of that in management. There really should be more of that. And that might be something, I mean, I'm not editor anymore, but that would be something I would like to see more generally.
Well, thank you, everybody. I think, Joe, are we, this is the time that we need to switch, right? So
Yep.
we don't see you in the groups. I just want to say thank you, everybody. And we hope to stay in touch and have more interactions with you in the future. Thank you so much.